conversation where we chat about everything politics over some coffee. Today we have political activist Jack Cocchiarella. Jack is a Gen Z political commentator and host of the Jack Cocchiarella Show. So thank you so much, Jack, for being here, and I'm really excited to kind of just dive right into it.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me. We're not that early in the morning. Well, I guess it is where you are. So this is the second cup in my thermos of the day. But hopefully your coffee is getting you started and we can have a fun conversation.
Yes, I have a very average mug with me today. And yeah, I'm not surprised that that's your second coffee of the day. I'm
We
almost.
we have needed it lately. At least, it's not Irish like Pete Hegseth might make it.
That's
So
true.
things aren't that bad yet.
That's funny. Well, Jack, I kind of want to start out with something pretty shocking, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. A recent Yale study showed that 18 to 20-year-olds are leaning Republican, unlike our older Gen Z counterparts. I'm 20. What have you seen in the field, and kind of what do you think younger voters are falling for? Why are they falling for MAGA politicians and, frankly, these very garbage policies?
Yeah, I think one thing that really makes the differentiation between, the older Gen Z and the younger Gen Z, at least right now in that polling, why I wasn't that scared about it, I am really worried about this rightward shift in young men in our generation. But the difference between a 20-year-old being very red-pilled and a 23-year-old who was maybe a little bit more to the right a couple of weeks ago, I think is the job market. I think when you're 18, everyone talks about how, when you get older, historically, you get more conservative. I think that's the opposite that's happening right now. I think it's very easy to realize that under Democratic presidents, we have lower unemployment, the stock market does better. The economy is generally thriving as we invest in actual job creation and building a more equitable middle class. So I think that is part of that differentiation. I think if you looked at that poll right after Trump or right before Trump was inaugurated, the difference might be a little closer. You might see still a greater shift to the right. So I think that plays into it. But also, we have really hit the point of perfected late stage capitalism algorithms, right? Instagram used to be a place where you'd share fun photos with your friends. Now they have figured out how to make us feel bad enough to stay on the platform long enough. And when you look at the platforms that are going after young men, it's giant, crypto scams that spent, I think, more money than any other demo, any other industry in this last election. It's betting markets, which sure, it's fun to drop a couple parlays in the NBA playoffs, but these are leading to bankruptcies and huge financial issues for young people who don't necessarily see a future in the normal economy. So they think they have to turn to crypto or meme coins or betting instead of an IRA or just working for a pension like their parents could have. So I think that's part of it is this general distrust in institutions has led to a rightward shift with an administration that says don't trust anything except Donald Trump. So they kind of fall into that cult of personality that's really exemplified in these kind of manosphere guys who want to challenge everything without any expertise. So that's my short, very long answer on that.
Well, you're exactly right. And I think what's funny about that is it's kind of like, well, why would we look for, social welfare policies if everyone's a potential millionaire? I
Hmm.
mean, everyone could one day just have their Bitcoin and kind of make millions of dollars, but in the end, that's not going to happen. And I think it's when people start to feel the effects of that not happening, and even worse, having them go into debt because they can't afford college tuition because they can't afford a home. I think that's even
Uh-huh.
worse. And yeah.
Yeah, that's been the bill of goods that's been sold like as the American dream. I think more so than just like you can do better than your parents. I think the wrong version of that dream is that you are close to becoming a billionaire, which is something that will never happen to everybody. It is just not going to happen. And if we lived in a society that valued making sure that people were, having their basic needs met rather than like what is the way to get rich, you think it's just about like all of the media that we consume early on, game shows and stories of underdogs triumphing. It's like what's not built into that is how people can try and fail. Now, I don't want to not have an aspirational society in which people think that they can't build wealth. I don't think it's enough just to tell people that they can get by. And I don't necessarily love the like, get ahead instead of get by campaigning because it still feels like you're not selling an aspirational enough vision. But yeah, that is a big problem that we don't realize or act like or try to work policy to make sure that people have basic needs met.
Yeah, and I think something that's frustrating a lot of people right now, and especially, whether it be Democrats or people on the left, they're frustrated that that message isn't getting to young people. And I know
Hmm.
after the election, everyone's like, it was messaging, it was messaging. Now, in the work that I've done, it's not just messaging, like it's outreach. Young people do not get contacted. They don't get constant phone banks, text banks, emails the same way that older people might. And so people don't really see that. It's not just that it's lack of messaging. Young people aren't even getting reached out to. And so now what you're seeing is really any Democrat that comes up and speaks out and says something that catches young people's attention, and that might not be a phone bank or a text bank, but it's on social media. I mean, we have, Democrats that are really trying to fight back in really unconventional ways right now. I know you interviewed Senator Cory Booker about his record-breaking 25-hour speech on the floor of the Senate. And we've seen efforts, I know, the Fight the Oligarchy tour hit a lot of states, and most importantly, Arizona, which I was really excited
Hmm.
to see. People's town halls. I mean, there was a town hall in one of our competitive districts just last night where MAGA Republicans are just refusing to listen to our people. I mean, this is fueling, I think, like kind of the energy we need right now. But what else do you think that Democrats, people who are running with leftist values, can really get young people like us to pay attention?
I think it can be speaking to directly what we want and kind of level setting. I spoke to Ruben Gallego about this, and it was funny. It was at the end of this really great interview that we had, and kind of just it wasn't necessarily a throwaway question because I really do, of course, care about this issue, but it was just like, let me put a quarter in the machine. Give me your thoughts on what we need to be doing with young guys. And we went for like another 10 minutes. And really the thing that he continued to just hit on is if guys want to buy a truck, they should be able to buy a truck. Like, we shouldn't look down upon that. We shouldn't think it's a bad thing. We should want to create a world in which they can do so, in which they can have their idea of success. And so, again, you say it's not just about messaging, it's also about outreach. I completely agree. The outreach has to land, though, in the places that they feel like they want to go. I talked about this on a previous podcast. I don't know. You clearly probably saw the morning routine guy, right? Who was like dunking his face into the
Yes.
bowls of water, and he had like his nice clothes and his cool Rolex and whatever. And what is being preached and constantly coming up in our algorithms is alternative ways for you to like quote unquote escape the matrix, whatever nonsense that means, and have like a more aspirational vision. But what that's also selling you is that person's course. That is the ultimate goal, right? They're creating an aspirational vision. And so it's to say, oh, if you just drop ship like Chinese products like me, then you can live the life that you want and you'll have security and you'll be able to flourish. But what that starts with is kind of presenting the lifestyle that these people want, a vision as corny and ridiculous as it might be, as structure and health and wealth and happiness, to some degree. So I think that we have to first figure out like, what do young people want? How do we give it to them? And I don't think it's the biggest ask in the world. I don't think our generation is all that different from any others. We just have to stop speaking at them and start speaking to them.
Yeah. And I will say Senator Gallego did a really amazing job of incorporating youth outreach into his campaign
Hmm.
because we work with a lot of the campaigns in Arizona, and he did a really phenomenal job, really trying to speak to young people, having youth-centered events. I know one of them was a pickleball event, which is something that kind of bridges that generational gap with the older generation and with young people as well. That's becoming increasingly exciting. So that was really exciting to see, and I'm glad you said that, and he said that about we have to make it. It's that Democrats do want to give young people a fun life, but we really have to speak with them about it instead of at them.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of other people's frustration and what I hear from a lot of even older people as well, they're, like, where are the young people? There are these protests that are going on every Saturday, every Sunday, even like throughout the week. And they're like, where are all the young people? And I grew up kind of in middle school during the whole March for Our Lives movement. And I mean, there were people that were leaving my junior high school classes, and I did, like in the middle of the day,
Hmm.
because of gun safety laws and the lack.
Yep, I remember.
Yeah. But obviously I would see people in high school and they actually were like going out marching, and that was really cool to see. And I thought, oh my God, when I get to high school, I'm going to do that too. And then it kind of fell off from there.
Yeah.
Even living through the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I remember that was my senior year of high school, and I was running out of class just to go to the state capitol and protest with everyone. And there were a lot of young people there, but it's like I hit college and all of a sudden nobody really cares anymore. How can we like spark we had blue waves in 2018 and 2022. Other than maybe abortion and gun safety, I mean, what other issues do you think we should be honing in on now that do you think that could kind of bring that same energy we saw with a lot of those movements?
I feel like part of the problem is that If you look back to the Obama era, a lot of what we were winning on and what was great for Democrats were issues that felt apolitical. Like, sure, talking about stopping endless wars or fighting for marriage equality, stopping, exploitation from giant banks and corporations. Those are political issues, but they seem like issues you can just talk about. And I feel like the right has started to dominate those spaces, where we talk about health and wellness. You attribute that to RFK Jr. Of course, this is not a person who you should take health advice from. He doesn't look like a person who is physically well. I know he's like working out all the time and jacked, but he's got like a very strange look to him. But you think about other issues of I don't want to again say that they're winning on free speech, like they're not actually just locking up people for op-eds that they've written, but it appears in the apolitical sense that when you just talk about issues that don't feel left or right, when you feel like you can have a conversation with someone who is just kind of who maybe not even following news but just engaging in culture, it seems like Republicans are winning on those issues. So more so than honing in on policy, I think it's important for us to find like where can we be culturally in like the vibe, which seems so abstract and difficult to tackle. But I think part of that is creating a better stereotype of what a Republican is than they have of what a Democrat is. We need to make sure that when people think of a Republican in their head, a conservative generally, it is someone who is pestering you and annoying you, someone who is speaking down at you, someone who doesn't hold the values that they espouse, someone who is trying to help their rich friends more so than they are you while selling you out. I think JD Vance, someone who is his entire political career is bought and paid for by Peter Thiel and is one of the most aggravating people to listen to, is a perfect example of this. But I think if we approach it strictly through policy, we're not going to be able to find ourselves disseminating the message that kind of just exists without us doing anything. We talk about organizing as this practice that can't just happen 3 weeks before an election, right? You need to be talking to people and engaging them in your community all the time. But the same goes for messaging. We need issues that do the work for us. If you thought of marriage equality back in the early 2010s, even if you weren't inherently political, when you thought about that, you thought about that as a winning issue for Democrats. If we think about foreign intervention, America's role in the world, even rising prices, which now are certainly attributed to Trump, but that maybe wouldn't have been the case 3 months ago. What do you think about? We need issues that exist without Democrats hammering them all the time, but you associate with liberal values that make you excited about our party, which doesn't necessarily have the highest approval rating right now. Now, that's a difficult task to accomplish, but I think might even be more so important than figuring out what our closing message is in the last month before the midterms.
And that's a really good point, actually. And also kind of goes back to, I know that I think it was Rolling Stone article or it was a magazine article. And it was, a photo of like all these really young people at the RNC, the Republican National Convention, I think it was.
Was it the Cruel Kids Club in the
Yes,
New
the
York
Cool
Times
Kids Club. Yes,
magazine?
I was trying to remember. Yes, it was the Cool Kids. And like that's how people that not that I'm like necessarily close friends with, but if I'm like talking to people in class and they're like, that's kind of their idea of a Republican or of a young Republican, like, oh, they're kind of, they do cool things and they go out with their friends and they're not so like woke. And I know that word has been demonized till forever, basically, which, most people can't even explain what that means, but that's okay. Um, and they just think of it as like this really like, oh, well, they just want to, have a lot of money and like what's wrong with that? And like
Yeah,
that.
and they want to say how they feel and so on and such, but that's not true. And we need to provide a better view of that, that these are people who are afraid of these ideas and these monsters that they create in their own head. And then because of that fear that's derived out of nothing, they want to impose restrictions on your ability to enjoy your life. These are people who isolate themselves in groups that don't express free thought. They don't want people of different ideas to actually engage. They hate universities because they're places where people from different backgrounds can come and can learn from each other, right? Conservatism is like it necessitates isolation, right? Because it doesn't want you engaging with new ideas. It is more fun to be a liberal. It is more fun to enjoy the world and other people and to go out and to try new things. I think that's something that we have to communicate, that this idea of what a liberal is like someone who is, getting getting in your shit and is like nosy and annoying and like petulant, but that's just not true. We have to change our public perception in the apolitical sense before we can really even think about the policy of it all, right? We have to sell people on what we are before we can deliver what we want. And so I think that it is important to recognize, at least right now in this moment, that I think so many big institutions have misread that it is not popular to be culturally conservative. Donald Trump did the Gulf of America. He's attacking trans kids in middle school and high school. And you know what? His approval rating is the lowest it's ever been. He's doing the culture war stuff and it doesn't work. That's not what people want. Maybe it is easier to attribute the cultural shift when you're talking about these things in the abstract, but really it's just people wanted their prices to be lower. Donald Trump didn't deliver that, so people don't want it, right? They don't want the bill of goods of the cultural shift that's being sold. And I thought that too many institutions, and you saw members of Congress, elected leaders, people on Wall Street, universities as well, say, oh, it looks like there's a big change that's come out of this election. Maybe Donald Trump really does have this big mandate, which he never did. He didn't even get a majority of the votes. You know, when it was 9 p.m. on election night and people thought, oh my God, is he going to win Virginia? Sure, it looked like a mandate, but it wasn't. The biggest flaw to me of how anyone has acted during this Trump administration is believing that he would stay even somewhat popular and not immediately fighting back against everything he did. I'm sure that there are about every single Democrat in the Senate who wishes they could take back any yes vote, any confirming vote that they gave on a nominee. I'm sure that all 47 Democrats in the Senate would like to take back the vote that they gave to Marco Rubio to unanimously confirm him. But we're finally seeing institutions, universities, Harvard is the first big domino to fall, but realizing, oh, wait, this guy is still as unpopular as he has always been. And I think that we get into trouble when we try to play the game of the current moment instead of standing by our values. I'm going on a rant here, but you
No,
brought up what woke is. But my problem with, what's considered woke is that it was something adopted by corporations because they thought, okay, this is the current moment. This is what we have to abide by. But of course, they never believed it. We do believe in people's fundamental freedoms, their value as human beings. It's the reason why we're not going to cave and, let members of our party start attacking trans kids because they think it'll benefit them politically. When Tim Walz was calling Republicans weird and saying, hell yeah, we're going to make sure that your freedoms are protected, that was a very positive message. People are okay disagreeing with AOC and Bernie Sanders because they know they're real. They know they actually stand by their values. I feel like this idea that's perpetuated about woke has less to do with what you believe and more to do with saying something you don't actually believe because it's going to benefit you. That's what I see from Gavin Newsom. And that's what I see from so many people who kind of want to sell our constituents in the Democratic Party, down the river for no reason because they think it works in the current moment, but it's just not going to. And that'll actually end up hurting them even more.
yeah, and it's an interesting point that you brought up about we're only really fighting the current moment. And you are right. When Tim Walz broke it down and just said, yeah, Republicans are weird, I thought that resonated a lot with people because that
Mm,
makes a lot more sense and is more digestible for a younger generation and sells kind of the cultural shift of no, they are weird for what they do, making them go on defense. Then, oh, well, look at Project
2025.
2025. And yeah, and everyone, was talking about Project 2025 and and listed out like every detail what was going on. And it was awful. And a lot of people thought, oh, well, he's not going to follow it. Or even if he was going to follow it, it was more difficult for me to explain that to somebody in my classroom than it was to be like, no, Republicans are just weird to people. And in a way, also that cultural shift comes with, I think we need to make it cool to care again. And I think that's what I saw with March for Our Lives or with when everything was happening with Roe v. Wade. People did care about it, and that was like okay to care. People, oh, that is the important thing to do. And now, for some reason, you're almost like weird if you care about
Yeah.
helping other people. And I think that's another big cultural hurdle, but also a lot harder than saying, oh, but look, we have this thing on the ballot this midterm cycle. And I'm thankful in Arizona we were able to pass abortion protection statewide, which obviously was very helpful to our state protections. But that only lasts so long. If I talk to a voter, and I did talk to a few voters on campus, and they were like, oh, well, I don't want to vote for either candidate. And I'm like, well, it's not either candidate. Look at like the issues you're talking about. Look at like, do you care about abortion? It's on the ballot as an amendment. If you just go in and vote for that, I won't care. Like, just do that at the very least. But that only lasts so long. That doesn't mean that that person is then going to come back in 2 years and say, oh, well, maybe there's something else on the ballot, they'll just culturally see it as well. Again, like that's institutionalism. That's, the establishment. I'm not going to participate in voting for that. And so really when we talk about it, yeah, we have to make it a lot cooler. And that comes from a huge shift from kind of everyone. And it's going to take a while.
Yeah,
But
the change of perception
yeah,
takes a long time. And you kind of alluded to that in what you were saying, about how people felt about Project 2025. We gave it this really negative perception, but Trump then said, well, I'm not doing that, which of course he was. Everyone who works in his administration helped write the plan. But what Donald Trump has going for him more than anything, more than, what he's best at, which is his ability to market, is his ability to be everything to anyone. Everyone has their own different version of Donald Trump. So many times I've heard conservatives and Republicans say, you liberals, you're freaking out. You take him so literally. You take him so seriously when he's just messing around. You have to take him. It's not at his word. It's what it means. And I heard that so much on tariffs. And now the economy has collapsed. Right. So it's like maybe we should have taken him seriously. But that's the superpower that he had, is that everyone had their own different perception of him because he was more of an apolitical being than he was a thing that you could pin down with policy. And so I think we need to have more of a vibe. And again, that's not built in a day. It's not very easy to figure out, but it certainly should be part of our focus is reshaping how people view us in the apolitical sense, right? Not exactly just what we're doing, in our day-to-day legislating, which of course is incredibly important in telling people how we're impacting their lives. But the Biden administration impacted a lot of people's lives in a pretty positive way. Kamala Harris's plan would have been much more beneficial, and that didn't resonate enough. So clearly, if we want to reach a generation that's not paying attention to politics that much or is engaging with it basically in 5-second snippets, then we need to make sure that like our aesthetic appeal is much better than the rights is.
yeah, you're exactly right. And that's why I really love what you do. Because I think that helps a lot more with public perception, people going on social media, looking at people, on YouTube. The first time I ever really became politically minded, and I talk about this a lot, is my upbringing. But then I would also, go on YouTube and watch Jon Stewart or John
Yep.
Oliver, and it would be like 30 minutes of,
That's every morning what I did in middle school because that's the 2016 election was I'd watch the Stephen Colbert monologue. And it's like, through comedy and through fun and hanging out, Jon Stewart's a perfect example as well.
yeah.
That's how we all kind of I feel like so many more people than maybe even community organizing, came about into this world.
Yeah. And yeah, that is going to be the cultural shift is like when we see more people tuning into people like Jon Stewart. I think he's back at the Daily Show now.
Hmm.
And Stephen Colbert. And then comes organizing of, okay, now it's your time to vote. Now here's who's on the ballot and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Um,
completely agree.
so yeah. But kind of I want to shift gears a little bit and just find out from you what MAGA Republican you really can't stand right now
It's
and
JD
who.
Vance. It's
Oh,
always JD Vance. I can't stand JD Vance.
yeah.
He killed the Pope. Um, I think JD Vance, I said this, JD Vance is the best unintentional political comedy since it was okay for Biden to not be able to talk. Because there was a stretch there where it was okay, right? When he did the classic line, when he had Ketanji Brown Jackson right behind him, Kamala Harris as well. He's like, America is defined by one word, is missing and it was like, oh, Joe, like you can't speak. That's fine. When we got to the CNN debate and he couldn't speak, and we're like, oh no, we're getting Trump again. That was bad. But JD Vance is the best unintentional comedy since then. The face memes are hilarious.
Yeah.
Um, Calling him ugly, which he is great. He killed the Pope. Him dropping and this was another thing that I wanted to point out about JD Vance. I did a whole video about this.
Mhm.
I talked about it for just like 5 minutes straight, and I just kept playing the clip. JD Vance is like, oh, I love Ohio State. I'm from Ohio. I'm a big football guy. I love sports. But if you don't know that the college football trophy does not have a base that you can set it on, like you don't follow college. Like it's not the Lombardi Trophy, which stands on its own, or the Larry O'Brien, which has the base and it stands on its own. Like the fact that he picked it up from that little the setting that it was in showed. And I like tried to make that point. It's like, why is no one talking about this? Of course, he dropped it and he looks stupid, but he clearly doesn't follow football. Like none of these guys actually have any of the masculine traits that they pretend to. They all fall in line with Trump. Trump makes fun of their wives and calls them nicknames, and they just take it. And like, how is that manly in any way? But JD, above all, is the one who bothers me because he has built his whole political career on saying that, the people that he grew up with, the people that he's, in the town from, that they've been talked down by coastal elites. And then JD Vance has President Zelensky in the Oval Office, and he's talking down at a man who's in the middle of a war. And it's like he is everything that he attacks, and he's such a nothing. And I hope that there's some part of him that's really upset with how it's all gone for him. Maybe there's not. Maybe he's completely sold out. But that's my hope, is that JD Vance knows that he's a horrible person.
And I'm sure he does deep down. But I
Hopefully.
didn't know how much I knew about JD Vance until you just went on that rant. Because I knew everything you were saying. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that. And I thought like maybe I wasn't paying attention enough, but no, like yeah, he is pretty awful. I wish I could say that there were, and we always say the word like moderate Republican. Not that their policies are that much better, but maybe their characteristics are. I couldn't tell you one moderate Republican in.
No, and Lisa Murkowski saying, there's a lot of us who are really scared right now. There's a lot of fear. It's very difficult to be in public service. And it's like, Lisa, why is that?
Yeah.
Like,
And it's
let's do a
yeah.
little reflection. What party has been causing that?
Yeah.
What guy has been causing that? It's crazy.
Historically, by the way, those campaign tactics have always been larger on the Republican side than it has been on the Democratic side. And now we're seeing it, 30, 40 years later, and it's still going on. And it's 20 times worse because we have every ability to reach out to a reporter in about 2 seconds to put something out there. But in contrast to your, I guess, biggest MAGA Republican you can't stand right now. Who is your favorite Democrat that you see that's standing up, and saying, hell no to Donald Trump these days?
It's my guy Tim Walz. That's
Yeah.
my guy. Tim Walz is my guy. I love Tim Walz. I was talking about this on a different podcast a couple of weeks ago. I said Tim Walz is our guy. He's
Yeah.
our FDR. He's making it happen. He's saying we're doing Medicare for all. He's probably running. I hope he is. But even if he's not, he's doing the thing which, maybe Cory Booker's speech did as well. And some people criticized it, saying like, well, what did it really do? It's like, well, it got Democrats to realize that, if you make a big moment, then you jump 16 points in presidential polls. And it's like, that's not the only thing that matters, but it instructs people that fighting is good. And Tim Walz immediately got out there and says, you know what? I'm going to Iowa. I'm going to Ohio. I'm going to Missouri. I'm going to these red districts, following after Bernie, leading the charge. And of course, I love Bernie and AOC and the work they're doing. I love Ro Khanna, who's been traveling the country as well. But Tim Walz is just my guy. He's been unleashed. It's the Tim Walz that we saw in the first 2 weeks of the campaign. That guy is back, and I love to see him. That's my favorite Democrat right now. And he's still governing the hell out of his state. So
Yeah.
big props to Tim Walz.
Absolutely. And he's very down to earth. He came out a few times in Arizona. We were really excited to see him every time he came out.
Hmm.
And he was very genuine to everybody and just a happy person to be around.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people want. Like that's what people want to go see. And I think having that like a closer connection makes him a lot more favorable, especially with younger people as well. So really at the end of the day, again, like thank you so much obviously for joining, but
Of
how
course.
can our viewers hear more from you? And I do want to tell you, probably the majority of people already watching this, and they are people in Arizona who know our group, or even out of Arizona who are familiar with what we do, they watch you all the time. My friend, I mean, he walked in his house in California last week and he was on vacation. His grandmother was watching your show on the television.
Well, I
And I'm like,
appreciate that. That's great.
yeah,
It's funny. My YouTube audience, it skews a little bit older. My Instagram audience is like strictly like I think the metric is like 17 to 35 or like 15, like whatever the lowest age that Instagram reports is like
yeah,
that's like 70% of it. And so it's like different in different places. So I like to have a little bit of a different approach. But really, what I'm trying to do, besides rant, and get things off my chest right now, is I'm trying to elevate voices as much as possible. I just had the New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani on my show. That interview is coming out today, and I'm really excited about that. But really, for me, it's like if you want to tune in and if you want to have the therapeutic yell sesh that I'm going to be participating in. That
yeah,
is amazing. But more than anything, just trying to use my platform to uplift Democrats who are doing it right and to make sure that the party is following the right direction. I just had Congressman Jason Crow on, who this weekend called out Gavin Newsom for saying that talking about Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a distraction. And he said the point that I've consistently tried to make, which is doing what's right is the right thing to do politically in this moment, right? We don't need to message test human rights. We don't need to focus group them. Just go out and do what is right. And that's the message that I'm trying to send to people. That's the push that I'm trying to make. And if you want to be a part of the community of people who are also trying to do that while uplifting young and inspiring and already established, but maybe people with less of a following, voices and Congress elected officials across the country, come hang out on the show. We have a good time. There's a lot of yelling about JD Vance. but it's a good hang.
I could hear that for a while, so it's no big deal. But again, thank you so much. I really appreciate all you do, uplifting really the cause, again, sticking by people's values. So thank you so much for
And I
joining.
think you're doing probably more work than me, so I'd also give yourself a bit of credit.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just yelling